Hi everybody, I'm April Woodard and I'm joined here today with Lynn Waltz, who is the author of Hog Wild. Welcome, Lynn, how are you?
Thank you, I'm good.
Good.
I'm
So
good.
first of all, if you had a sentence to describe this book, how would you describe it?
Well, it's the untold story of the largest union win of the 21st century. But it's also a commentary on our world today, where 1% of our population owns 40% of the wealth, and how that's tied to the health of unions in this country.
Wow, okay. So this started out as a thesis, is that correct?
It started out as an assignment with a business magazine in Virginia, and they sent me to do a profile of Smithfield Foods. And I came back and I said, well, Smithfield Foods has a lot of problems with labor, and the federal government is investigating them, and I think that that should be part of the profile. So that was my first introduction to Smithfield Foods. And then I did another magazine piece about it, and then it became my thesis for grad school, and then I pitched it as a book and got a contract with University of Iowa Press.
Wow, so how did you know that it was a bigger piece, that it wasn't just an article or even a series of articles?
Well, I didn't initially. The story that I sold as a book was the story of one character who was a high-level manager who actually hated the union. She fired union workers illegally, but then she was fired herself, and so she testified for the government against Smithfield Foods. So that was the story that I sold. But the editor at the University of Iowa Press helped me see that it made sense to tell the entire story of how the union won at what is the world's largest slaughterhouse.
Wow.
And it's in North Carolina.
Wow. Okay, so you're talking about Smithfield Foods. That's
Yes.
a pretty big company, Fortune 500. But
it is.
a little person taking on them with a book. How did you deal with, were you challenged by that?
Yes, in fact, there's a federal gag order that prohibits Smithfield Foods or the UFCW, the United Food Commercial Workers Union, from commenting publicly. And so I had to write the entire book without official response from the main players in the book.
How does one do that? Or how do you even get like a witness or somebody to come forward? Because everyone's terrified, right, with the gag order.
Yes, and many, many people refused to talk to me. No one currently employed by the UFCW would. The first person to come forward was that witness, and she was very reluctant because she felt like that Smithfield had already blackballed her, and she was afraid of them. The second person to come forward was the lead prosecutor for the government, who was not under a gag order. Okay. And the National Labor Relations Board provided me with all of the court documents, so that was another way. But the big coup was getting the mastermind of the union campaign, who's retired, and he said, gag order be damned.
Wow.
This is a story that has to be told, and I'm going to tell it. He said, what are they going to do? Come around my house with a helicopter and swoop down and put me in jail? He's in his 70s.
Oh,
he said, I don't care. I'm going to tell this story.
Wow.
The story needs to be told.
Wow, that's amazing. Talk to me about the frustration, though, because when you started, people weren't willing to talk to you until you had that major person come forward and say that he was going to do it, in spite of the fact that he could have faced jail time.
Right, that's right. It was very difficult, and it involved lots of driving down to Tar Heel, which a lot of people say, well, why couldn't you just look up their addresses or look up their phone numbers? But this is rural North Carolina. I spent a lot of hours driving around trying to find people. In one case, I hired someone to lead me to someone's house.
Wow.
And as we drove by, they kind of pointed over the top of the car and
waved goodbye.
And I pulled in and knocked on the door. One guy I had interviewed in 2005 for my original story, but he wouldn't respond to emails or phone calls. And so I literally drove to his house, knocked on his door, and got him up from a nap. And then I stayed down there for 2 days interviewing him. So he became a main character as well. And he was one of the union organizers inside the plant. So it was good because I had someone inside the plant, a manager who had been there, the prosecutor of the case, and then the mastermind of the campaign, and all the court documents.
Wow.
Not just from the National Labor Relations Board, but also there were civil suits and sexual harassment sexual harassment suits, and any number of civil rights suit. So there were lots of court documents that I could draw from.
Take me to the experience when you went to North Carolina and there was one particular woman, I believe, that you were trying to get, and you were petting her dog and doing all the schmoozing that you needed to do. Tell me about that experience.
Well, I knocked on the door and she just cracked the door, and there was this big booming dog, barking, this big-headed dog, and so I was like, hi, I told her who I was, and she said, I don't want to talk to you. I talked to the New York Times back in the day. I don't want to talk to any reporters. Get out of here, And so I slipped her my phone number, and then I just said, I may never get to talk to you again. So I want to tell you how honored I am to meet the woman who took on Smithfield Foods and won.
Wow.
I said, you're a hero. And so she let the dog out. And then I started playing with the dog. I just said, okay, we're just going to keep going here.
Right,
so I played with the dog for a while. She came out, she started to have a cigarette. She had pneumonia, she started coughing. It was really cold, it was February, and it was really cold. And so I was kind of shivering, and she said, oh, come on in for a minute. 3 hours later.
My goodness, 3 hours.
3 hours I talked. That was our first interview, 3 hours. And I didn't have a pad of paper or a pen because I didn't want to scare her off.
Right.
So I just was standing there. So I start asking for scraps of paper. I'm writing on the back of, receipts.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Well, I know that you're a professor also. This has to be quite a case study and a lesson about fortitude and stick-to-itiveness and, really getting the story. Do you share this with your students?
Yes, and I tell them I was always more known, I've been a professional journalist for years. I've always been better known for getting the story than writing the story. Writing is difficult for me, so I really feel for them when they struggle with their writing. But you have to have a story to tell before you can write.
Right.
And you can get help with your writing. It's harder to get help with your reporting. You just have to be tenacious and just never give up.
Okay.
And I looked for this woman. I was trying to find her over a period of about 10 years. Now, not full time,
right?
But driving 5 hours and then trying to find someone, it was very difficult.
And what about the risk? I mean, you drive 5 hours, and what if they're at church or they're not at home or they don't answer the door?
Yes, and you go to doors that aren't those people, and so you're walking up to strangers.
So what do you hope comes out of printing this book and releasing it to the world?
Well, I hope that for one thing, it shows people what it takes to get a union win in today's world, and the amount of money and effort that it takes to fight the corporate blowback against unionizing. There's a complete industry called union busting, colloquially called union busting. And any corporation where there's a union fight, they hire these consultants to bust the unions, and they're very effective. Union membership has dropped dramatically. But if you track union membership and the drop in union membership with the drop in the middle class, they track equally. The rise of the unions was responsible for the rise of the middle class after the New Deal in the middle of the last century. And we are seeing that with the demise of the unions, we're also seeing the demise of the middle class. So the bigger thing that I want people to see is hopefully that unions are not bad, that unions are good for the economy, good for the worker, and to see how difficult it is for a plant to unionize, especially in the South, especially in a right-to-work state.
Okay. What is the one thing that you want people to know about this book that they may not see by just looking at the cover?
It's a story of human willpower that is intertwined with huge international movements, such as NAFTA, such as immigration, such as our first African-American president, political will, corporate greed, huge forces, and the ability of individuals and their willpower to overcome those huge, it's a confluence of the personal and the international movements. So I find that to be really fascinating. And I think the characters really carry the story. So yes, it's a big story about the unionization, but it's about one woman who decides to fight back. It's about one man who has a mastermind. He's the mastermind of this union. He goes after Harris Teeter. He goes after Paula Deen, who was the spokeswoman. And he has marches and protests. And there's a May Day march. It's a remarkable campaign.
I can kind of see it as a movie. Have you thought about a screenplay?
I have. And there is a documentary called Union Time that covers part of the same time as the book. And so that's very exciting. But I would like to see it made into a feature film.
That'd be great.
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Do you mind reading some of it for us
I would love to.
Okay, great.
I'd love to.
Sure.
So let me set this up a little bit. So Joe Luder grew up in Smithfield, and he worked at his father's slaughterhouse, a very small slaughterhouse. and he built that into a Fortune 500 company. And at a certain point, he decided to build the world's largest slaughterhouse. And you would think that he would build that in Virginia. But Virginia was not kind to Joe Luder. It found him guilty of all kinds of pollution infraction, both the federal government and the state government. There were labor issues, everything was unionized. And so he was looking for a better place to go. He needed several things. He needed politicians who would look the other way. He needed weak environmental laws, not just for the plant itself, but for the hog farms that would inevitably spring up and produce a lot of poop. But he also needed cheap labor. And so a right-to-work state with a history of oppressing workers, maybe even a legacy of slavery, would be just the place. North Carolina, with the lowest union membership in the country, fit the bill on all counts. There was only one problem. North Carolina had spewed forth a spitting, scratching tomcat of a girl, not unlike many other girls at that time, trying to claw their way to a life better than their mamas. But this one girl just happened to grow up to go to work for Joe Luder. And she was a beauty. Strong, willful, smart, and blonde, and not afraid to curse, pull a gun, or beat the living daylights out of anyone who crossed her. Sherry Wright Buffkin was born and raised in Bladen County, North Carolina, where peanut, tobacco, and cotton fields sprawled across a poverty-stricken flatland near small towns where closing cotton mills had left behind desperation and welfare. Every day as a child and teenager, Buffkin looked smack into the face of that poverty. The country roads carried her past families who couldn't find jobs and barely had enough to eat. Joe Luder was 30 when Sherry Buffkin was born on April 6, 1969. During the 1980s, while Sherry Buffkin worried herself through puberty, Luder, now a wealthy businessman, saw something shimmering above the swath of land just southwest of the Cape Fear River. It looked like gold. Buffkin had grown up on that river, sliding or climbing down rope ladders and chicken wire her daddy had strung up on its steep banks so the kids could get to the rope swing and drop into the water. Driving from home in Elizabethtown to Fayetteville, they'd pass that parcel of land and never pay it no mind. It was just 830 acres of nothing, right past the tiny town of Tar Heel on North Carolina Highway 87, a two-lane highway that wandered up to I-95, the largest north-south trucking corridor on the East Coast. My mama worked for minimum wage. If I got a shirt and a pair of shoes before school started, I was doing good, Buffkin recalled. There wasn't much to do but sneak out her bedroom window or leave it open. So Buffkin got thrown out of her mama's house at 16 and married Davy, the only boy she'd ever been with. Her daughter Nicole was born March 12, 1999. There was little work, just an endless horizon. Of course, way back then, that Virginia businessman, with his obsession for building a pork dynasty, had never heard of Sherry Buffkin. But one day he would. One day he would know all about that poor little white girl from Bladen County.
Beautifully written. Oh my
Thank you.
goodness, that
Thank
was
you.
beautiful. So Sherry Buffkin is your main character.
One of my
the
main characters. Yes, she's a very important character.
Is she
yes.
the one that came out with the big dog?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, what other insights can you give us into who she is?
She is a very complicated character. She was a high-level manager, the only woman manager. Most of the management was white, so she had a lot of African-American employees working for her, and she towed the company line. They told her to fire union people who supported the union. She fired them, dozens of workers.
Wow.
And she didn't care until she got fired. And then I'll leave it for the book to explore the reasons why she decided to turn on Smithfield Foods, but when she did, it was a doozy, because she was the high-level manager who knew the inner workings, knew that they had broken federal labor law, and the judge called her a key witness. And he believed everything that she said, and he did not credit any of the testimony from anyone from Smithfield Packing, which is a subsidiary of Smithfield Foods. So that's a really remarkable part of the story.
I love it. Okay, well, Hog Wild, Lynn Waltz, thank you so much.
Thank
Where
you.
can people get a copy of the book?
They can order directly from University of Iowa Press, from Amazon, Indie Books, Barnes & Noble, put my name in and put the name Hog Wild, and you can order the book, $24.95.
Okay.
Available May 1st.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sure.